Within southern desert winds sprint coyotes, lost in looping ghosts of dust, and the maker of the wind and the shadowed desert mountains. All of desert's energy is within, and millions of sagebrush illuminate firefly cities. Dancing traces of dust fractals blur, blue horizons turned red, and the weeping sunsets contact the elixir of imagination and the underground spirits who nourish it. Silence in the Shamanic Desert by Ian Cattanach.
Today we have Ian Cattanach, the man who needs no introduction in this space, but nonetheless deserves one. He is the creator behind Right Conscious on YouTube, which is soon becoming like the headquarters for everything literature related. And hopefully today we get to talk about more of an aspect I don't think he gets a chance to talk about often, which is his work as a poet. So, Ian, do you want to add anything to your introduction?
No, but I want to shout out all the strands out there who are strange, all of the subscribers to Benno's work, all the OGs, I love it, you guys. I love each and every one of you. I was reading some of Benno's poems out there today. Benno is one of the true literary OGs. He has made me a better writer, a better thinker, up my standards. I hope he is doing that. Hope he is doing that for you, man. And thank you for bringing me on, Benno.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you on because you have really spearheaded the development of this community. So and I think it's um cool to have you talk about poetry and those aspects, because even though you've been like very open about like certain books transforming your life, especially novels like Blood Meridian, perhaps Infinite Jest, and others, like in terms of your work, I think you would describe your main ambitions in terms of poetry, right? Like the
Yeah.
whole becoming like the best desert poet, right? So so I wanted to start from there and ask you, at what point did poetry became like a thing for you?
Yeah, like most of us, I started poetry to woo women. In high school, you're desperate, someone's mad at you, you make a mistake. I have a memory right now of driving around with my friends. I'm just trying to scribble something down. Like I did something super dumb and I'm like, I got to start this. And then, that was like when I was 14, 15. But then as I started to read more and I was reading more, then suddenly I got deeper into this poetry world and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And it was so much more accessible because like many of us, I tried writing fiction in high school or like early on. And I was like, this is terrible. I have no idea how I get from here to, Crime and Punishment. But when I started writing poetry, I felt like it was closer and it was always immediate. It was something that I could really connect with. So what really kind of kicked me off into poetry though, is I was attending university in Utah, and I got two traumatic brain injuries from longboarding and skiing within like 2 months. I knocked myself out twice in 2 months, and I was basically like out for the count. Like I was full logic, bro, Benno. I was an atheist. I was just like, if I like saw someone who was Mormon, I was like, Joseph Smith dated a 14-year-old just to troll him. I was just being a total asshole. And so then when I got these I was I was majoring in philosophy, super deep in that world. Like when I read Cormac McCarthy, I would like see the darker elements. Like I didn't see like what I see now. And so I get these concussions and suddenly I couldn't read, Benno. I'm sitting there and I'm like, dude, what do I do? I couldn't like think, like it hurt. And so I was like, dude, this sucks. And so I just started going out and sitting on top of this hill and just looking over the city and sitting there because I knew that like Taoists did that. I was like get into Eastern philosophy, so I was like, wow. So then through that kind of contemplation of just sitting and meditating, I started to just these poems just started to come out of me, just writing about what I was seeing because I just had nothing to do, and it felt easy to write those. It felt like okay, this is simple. I can do this, and then that kind of started the trajectory for me as a poet. That's when I realized like, oh wow, I actually really like that. And that's why I think I'm the way that I am now with like desert poetry. I only write my poems out in the desert. That I just, for whatever reason, train myself to just write with what immediately is coming to me. So,
Okay, okay, interesting. So would you say that it wasn't necessarily from like a poem or a poet or reading poetry, but more from this contemplate, like a practice of contemplation in nature, that you started to be interested in creating it, not necessarily um, from reading in it and just enjoying it, I guess.
yeah. And so later on, there were some quantum leaps that we can talk about when I read other poets. But at the start, I didn't even know about the Chinese poets or nature poetry. I knew about haiku, but yeah, it just really started for me just feeling the need to write about what was going on and not and knowing it also didn't need to be turned into like a short story or a novel because I would try to do that. I would be sitting there and I'm gonna turn this into a story and it would suck. And I'm like, of course it sucks. There's nothing to say here. But then because this emotion can only last so long, this emotion isn't going to really be able to go beyond 20 lines. And so I was like, okay, this is really good for just, meditation, kind of this awareness stuff that I'm working on. So yeah.
Yeah, and like it's interesting that it also has like a very important, I guess, like physiological component, right? Like because there seems to be also like a very important aspect sometimes related to towards health and like and illness being almost like a catalyst towards creation and creation in some fundamental aspects, right? Like in like for example, like in Nietzsche, like a lot of his style, he said, he derived almost entirely from just like being ill and having to think in terms of like these really short aphorisms. And there's a lot of other poets that also talk about these aspects. For example, even T.S. Eliot said that he actually only wrote when he wasn't feeling that well, right? Like, and like we could take like a very simple or reductive approach in saying that at least it helps in decreasing in people who are like logic bros, as you mentioned, that drive to always over rationalize everything, right? Like because you cannot go with that mentality into writing poetry and probably into writing almost any kind of literature or any art, right? Like that's even though it seems a little bit counterintuitive in terms of like novels or other things, because they might incorporate a lot of more of that. But like but certainly in poetry, it can definitely help to achieve like more receptive states once you have like kind of like decrease the flow of energy that goes just into constantly like Lego block and reality, right?
Yeah, 100%, Benno. I mean, and what's funny about that is that I had this revelation and I was kind of going with this more phenomenological in the moment type writing. And then I took some time off from university, was just bouncing around the United States, messing around, doing drugs. And I went back to university or went back to community college for creative writing. And then when I re-entered the classroom, the logic, the high stakes, like, the perceived high stakes, classroom, then the logic bro started coming out of me a little bit more again. And my writing tanked, my quality of fiction and poetry tanked again. And I was like, what the hell's going on? And now in retrospect, I could see that I was taking things like way too seriously, that I was like, once again, like not just letting it flow. And so then I had to relearn that lesson later on. So yeah, I mean, I really think that like that's one of the problems. And it's really hard too, like to balance it. Like with this kind of self-publishing mindset that we have. Like we're here on our own and we have to somehow you don't want to be competitive, but you have to like somehow gear yourself up to do this. And like sometimes, and it's like, man, it is a hard thing to balance. Yeah, because like to yeah, and so and because most people and this was like a big breakthrough for me, was that you think that you have to do X, Y, and Z to logically get more readers, but I've found that when I do illogical things, it actually works way better.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, it's something I always like to kind of like talk about it, which is like the notion of balance, because one of the harder aspects of like almost any human endeavor is to how to understand that there are different um, dimensions of to you as a person, and sometimes like through whatever society or culture in general, we tend to focus on only certain aspects or just one dimension. For example, just rational thought, right? Like and then you start the other parts of you start kind of like dwindling, and writing especially, even though it works with words, if you just leave it like at a rational level, like you're not gonna get anywhere. You're just gonna have like notepads full of like ideas and like plot development, but you will never have the life, the creative impulse, right? That it requires to function as a fiction, as a poem, and yeah, like and it happens the same way in your work, when you try to make it like public or social, I guess, like there's you have to incorporate to learn to see the other dimensions that it involves, and not just the very practical aspects.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big breakthrough because when I see what you're doing, like that poem that, like, I don't know if it was a haiku, very short poem about the power lines the other day that you did, that was like a response to someone's note. I was like, wow, he just looked at, like, how did you make that? I mean, I'll just ask you here, how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, like it's well, in that case, it was just Colin, who's another haiku writer. Like he's like we are participating in like a Renga session with like Body, like, and so I follow his stuff, and I saw him post it, and like uh
Did that just come out of nowhere? Did you just see that and like, hey, I'm just the
I started thinking about it, like it's also something that I've been trying to do, like more collaborative work, right? So like if I see somebody's poem or post and it inspires me, I will definitely, like try to do something about it. I'll give it like a dramatic reading or try to do something else. Like in general, I just think that it's something like I've been trying to do. So yeah, in that sense, it's not necessarily something that came out of the blue, right? Like I do try to have that mentality that if I like something, I try to collaborate in some way, or just try to expose it in new ways.
I'm just mentioning that because that poem, when I read it, just made me sit back and be like, wow, we compared the power lines to hair. And I was like, I've never thought of it that way. That was very artistic, Benno. Good job. Like, you know what I mean? I was like, wow, that was good. I was like, man, like, it made me like, damn, like, I need to, like, like, and I was like, I need to respond more. Like, that just, it felt like you said, collaboration, just building on each other's stuff, like, just always thinking in things and doing stuff. Like, it's really good.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I think it's yeah, it can bring like things that you wouldn't otherwise do alone, and I think that this is a notion that has become kind of forgotten. Like in a sense, it's weird because like especially with language and like with writing, you're definitely formed by like a great tradition, right? Like you're never really working out of zero, but we've gone on this tradition of putting like originality and inventiveness over everything, so that it has almost become like a competition of egos, right? Like and who can be the most creative, like daring, and all it's led to is like these absurd, cryptic, navel gazing works, that have become even less creative, even less innovating. And an aspect that was very important before was one of collaboration, even not just between like writers, and like they would write themselves all the time, right? Like people would have huge correspondences, you know, like of course we got like Ezra Pound, right? Like and like things didn't happen just like in a vacuum because of the individual worth of one person, right? Like it happened both in like as a part of a community, right? And not just in terms of like getting access to like publishing rights or something, but also in terms of just like getting advice, right? Like the wasteland is the wasteland because in great part because of Ezra Pound, right? Like who also like had a big editorial decision there. So and we get like Rilke who was hanging out like with other kinds of artists, right? Like sculptors or whatnot. So we've lost this kind of notion, and we, especially in poetry, because we've been like so pushed to the edge that you kind of have to work like in your little corner and become this little introvert, right? Like when in reality that makes it a much less fertile way of working.
100%. I mean, people are, yeah. I mean, because many of us raised in the suburban boxes or not in a community have somewhat had to live with authors of the past, and it's important to read them and obviously build on them, and that is the traditional aspect, but that's just one half, like, because we can build and be a part of a tradition. Many people miss out on that. All the creative and inventive people, or the people that just don't read, they're totally missing out on that, and their work suffers. But then on the other side of the aisle, there's the, just like I said, you just responding to someone and writing a beautiful poem because of you were just inspired, and being in that constant state, and that's something that I'm really pushing, is that reciprocity, collaboration, um, yeah, just any type of correspondence, because it's such a beautiful word. It's a two-way channel of energy that can sometimes create this beautiful third body. Uh, and like you said, I mean, people don't understand that most people, like I always say, the bookshelf behind me, on the bookshelf behind me, almost everybody had a collaborator, a shadow group even that were helping them. Even guys like Cormac McCarthy, who are like, I don't like writers. Like it's now come out, he was hanging out with Edward Abbey and Guy Davenport and all these people, and those guys are legends. Like that's like me hanging out with, like with George Saunders and like stuff, and then being like, I don't talk to writers. Like that's huge. And he was editing their work. He was helping them. Like yeah. So anyway, it's everybody. I don't know who is actually divorced from that. So
Yeah, and to realize that it's kind of like to think about it in terms like as a win-win scenario in a sense, because part of the problem with this like modern mindset is that you terms like you tend to thinking about art in terms of what you can get out of it. That will be very common, especially from the types of personality that artists mostly belong to, right? Like and instead of just thinking about you know like a, you start to think not just in continuing tradition, but thinking it also like as a chain of links, right? Like, and that you also have to be like not only taking from the past, but also like giving to the future, and that's when something can become really rewarding when you actually see that you're starting to maybe inspire somebody else, right? Like and that you can give also back in terms of that cultural enrichment, right? Like when it becomes much more of a flow you belong to than just like this little monument you make to yourself.
yeah, and that's something that I've appreciated more just from YouTube, because years ago when I was teaching, I was like, this fucking sucks. This is terrible. Like I only wake up a couple kids a year. Like this sucks. And it does sometimes. Sometimes it feels like you're just in the swamp. And you are. But now that I've like helped people on the internet, now I feel like I'm more confident in myself, and now like my students feel that, and now that like I'm in this collaborative environment all the time with people like you and my even my students and my wife, and that's actually the most important thing for me. It's almost impossible for me to fall off now because I have a whole group of people behind me. Like You know, it's crazy. Like the other day, like there was a I had a kid last year who was just an absolute shit. Like, would throw stuff at me. Just not the I didn't think got anything, right? And then I had scheduled posted like some video and it posted during the school day. And as I was leaving the school or going somewhere at lunch, he stops me. He's like, "Hey, I just watched your video in my last class, Literary Renaissance." And he walked away. And I was like, "What the hell?" And I was like, wow, this kid, I don't think he read anything last year. And here he is watching my videos. I was like, wow, but that was actually like a positive thing. I was like, wow, this is awesome. And so yeah, I mean it's kind of one of the and that's kind of one of the sad things of like the modern school too, is that like I feel like more teachers like should be engaging in what they're doing, like should be actually like making content, doing something like, like, because it's so inspirational to others and even your friends and your family. Like when you're doing something like, um, my wife's mom is like now writing poetry and it's like, it's like, wow, this is so good. So yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, it can be yeah, it can be hard to know sometimes how things will affect, somebody else. And but yeah, it really helps to also have that sense of work, that at first you need to have to be doing it without regards of the consequence too, right? Like this is
Yeah.
something that you like, even if it's not gonna be necessarily impactful as soon as you want, there's still something that's worth doing, regardless, right? Like a lot of the times, like appreciation for art really does not depend on the author that much, and it can, turn out in very mysterious ways, right? Like Emily Dickinson or Franz Kafka, like the reasons why they became famous, like are fairly arbitrary. So, yeah, like I think that's also important, right? Like even if you don't feel that it's having the impact immediately, like it's still important as a personal task, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a whole other thing, just doing art for the personal measure. But I don't think most people realize, and that's what like a big message I'm pushing is like, guys, first of all, this is a long game. This is a decades long approach. We're not in the cryptocurrency or something game. We're in a very slow, climb. But you don't know, like you may be, and it sucks to be this, but you may be the step. Like this is how I view myself. Honestly, I view myself as a stepping stone for like someone way better than me. Like especially on YouTube. Like I know, like because I've met them. Like I know women who are more intelligent than me, more well spoken than me, very beautiful, and if they got on YouTube and did what do what I do, they would and they're much more positive than me. They have less character flaws than I have. They would have a huge impact. And that person's coming. There are people coming, but there has to be someone with the flaws. There has to be, and same in writing, there has to be that initial group that inspires the next group. Like many people don't talk about the beats. Like the beats get talked about, a decent amount, but without the beats, bridging modernism and postmodernism, we don't get postmodernism. So there had to be this group, and there are random people. Like there's this great poet named Jack Spicer. He might be one of the best, and people hate when you say that, but he is for sure one of the best beat poets, but no one really knows about him. He inspired everybody. He was like the man back in the day, and he was teaching people. Like if you ask all the big authors, like who was one of the best, they say, oh, Jack Spicer. We have no idea who he is now. But without him, Allen Ginsberg and everyone else, like even like music, like The Doors, like a lot of the music by The Doors was co-written by I'm forgetting his name. I met him one time. I don't know his name, but it was by a poet, And so it's like all these cultural things are all built off sometimes people who just are forgotten. But in the long run, 500 years from now, are people going to be listening to The Doors still? Is Jim Morrison's name going to be echoing through the halls? Probably not. Eventually, we're just all stepping stones. And so, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. At one level, you always have to think yourself as a stepping stone, right? Like that, and which is wonderful, right? Like it's like culture has like its own mysterious ways, and you can be at the top, for 100 years, disappear, come back, like like the notions of making it and like becoming like part of the canon are sometimes very misguided. So to get back into specifically poetry, like like so did so for you it seems that it was always very tied, especially just I would say like a form of spiritual practice. So was it specifically developed through like reading like Taoistic literature?
Yeah, I mean that yeah, the spiritual practice, yeah. I mean, it was yeah, like Taoism and like all that. Yeah, I would say a lot of it was built through that. But you know, a lot of the yeah, I would say so. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'll answer the question a little bit deeper. You know, there was a period where I came back to poetry, and suddenly I just started putting in like a lot of time. Like I just decided, hey, I want to spend time out in nature, and I'm just gonna go out here without any ambition. And that was just very Taoist in nature. Like I was basically because I always say that there's like I think that you should take two approaches in life. You should either be like on or you should just be totally off. Like you should be in the world and collaborating or you should just be not in the world at all, not working, like just figure out how to get by with as little as possible. And that seems to work really well to like for massive growth. So I took that path for a couple years. And in that period, it was kind of weird is that like I didn't do anything. I wasn't even reading poetry, but then my poetry started taking some quantum leaps just by spending time and just writing a little bit. And then when I came back to the world, that's when I started discovering like actual poets and like all the stuff I'm into now. So yeah, it was basically just like a lived Taoist approach where I was just like meditating and spending time out there. Yeah.
Okay, and yeah, and like probably from there it was also always very tied to like nature poetry and like was it like the desert like immediately like something that was part of that like or did that came later?
Yeah, it was always a part of it just because it was all I had, man. I mean, I realized, I actually am forgetting something here. So what I did discover when I was like 18, 19 was Ezra Pound and the whole modernist crew. Like that's what I remember now. And they translated all these people from the East, and then like I discovered the White Pony translation, which was impactful. And that's where it kind of stopped for a while. But then I started to understand the bridging of East and West, especially in the early 20th century, which also included like Aleister Crowley and all the occultists of the time, because there was a huge explosion when they discovered all this Eastern mysticism. And so that was kind of the fuel that took me until I actually started like being very serious about reading like super in depth into poetry. So yeah, I mean that stuff like there's a great book called Imaginations by William Carlos Williams. That has it's like basically a creative writing manual. It has all the it's just like it's a really great book. Anyway, so that one was like really inspirational. But they have this focus, William Carlos Williams said, no things no ideas, but in things. Like that was the big motto, like focus on the object. And I knew that that was bullshit. I knew when I would write that it was bullshit, but I practiced that for a while. I was in that mentality for a while, like focus on the object, which is like which was lucky I found that because that's a decent starting point. That's what Rilke did, like focus on these objects because if you can't write about, the mushroom or whatever, then how are you going to write about like the complexity of your emotions about your childhood? It's maybe not, I mean, maybe you can, but it's a good starting point. So that's where I was at for a couple years. A mix of that and just like pseudo spiritual bullshit that like I'm embarrassed to like, like a cult leader poetry almost like not like that but just like super new agey just like random stuff that I was coming up with and so then eventually I yeah took that to the next level and then for some reason I well not some reason so I my high school was on the edge of Las Vegas in the desert and I joined the cross country team the running team and the track team so I would just run I ran 300 days a year out in this desert for 4 years and I didn't realize it, but I developed a relationship to that desert. Like I spent more time out there than anybody else in the city. So then after I kind of crashed out, after I kind of fell down Icarus style, from all the drugs and all the craziness, I was like, I just started going out there again. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go start running and hanging out and just wandering around because I know this place. And then the poetry just started. Then I realized I didn't know because when I was in Utah, it was a forest. It was all this forest land. And when you're in the forest, it's very active, right? There's a bunch of stuff going on. But then when I got out to the desert, I'd be sitting out there and I was like, there's nothing going on. There's not one person in sight. There's not one sound. There's some dead plants, not one animal. And so I'm just stuck with myself. It became this meditation process. And then suddenly these ideas just started to flow, you know?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of interesting things, and I think a lot of people might not be aware of how important like poetry is in like the development of language, not throughout the time, right? Like, and there is like a notion of understanding that all language starts at one point, just like from something very from a thing or something very physical or from nature, right? Like even like a verse, from poetry comes like a furrow, like in the land, right? So we these things eventually start evolving through poetry, right? Because we discovered that there's like a connection between the exterior and the interior, right? And that these things that initially seem like disconnected have a profound relationship towards our interior, right? Like so, and poetry is kind of like that exercise of discovering through let's say specifically nature here, like yourself, right? So I think that's why, in general, nature has such an important role in poetry, right?
Yeah, and well, and it goes back to this idea. There's a great Robert Bly has some great essay. I can't remember the name right now. It's in some weird esoteric pamphlet that I have, but he talks about how that poetry stems from like form, that form is like everything, and that many of the classic poets, whether it was like the Chinese poets or even like in Beowulf and and sometimes in the Arthurian romances, they are writing the form of nature, what they energetically saw nature as. And so like conceptually, and I find this fascinating that when I say like write in the form of the bear, it's not like you draw like it's like not like the shape of a bear, the poem, but rather what's the energetic signature of the bear? Because before language was invented, and especially the alphabet. So before we had the alphabet, all we had oral language and we had animism. It was anticipation. And so all we had was these experiences where we would, come across something and experience this energetic signature, and it would impact us in a certain way. And so in early culture, especially oral storytelling culture, they still had a connection to this, and the alphabet is the best form of animism, and I've discussed this before a ton, because it makes you hallucinate. When you read, you hear voices and you see things, and that's the same thing that happens when when oral oral pre-alphabetic people were out in the world. Benno and I be walking to the water, and we turn the corner, and suddenly there'd be maybe a fallen rock or something beautiful, and we would be struck, and it would maybe impact us in a certain way. Or we'd see an animal, or something crazy would happen, or we'd experience these things, and then we would tie that emotion to that thing. And it was this very personal thing. And so for a while, people were able to bring that into their work before we got totally lost in this world of language. So, and then also, I mean, Christianity also had a big impact on this. And I read something the other day that between like Paradise Lost and some other poem, there wasn't one canonical poem that like actually mentioned nature outside of just like a passing reference, like mentioning nature in like a spiritual way. It was like hundreds of years. And it's like Jesus Christ. Because before that, if you look at the oral tradition, it was everything. So anyway,
Yeah, like like it's always gonna be complicated. Like the relationship with nature. I don't think necessarily it, want to say that it's always been idyllic, but there are certainly healthy ways to go about it. Because like even though we think that, and probably could argue that right now we are at our worst in terms of our relationship, like it was something that like even the Greeks, talked about, like or even like the Norsemen with all their animism and stuff. They would then, like start deforesting everything just to build ships and go make war. It's um like it's not always as easy to pinpoint, I guess, to what things will make us go haywire or imbalance, like, because
Yeah.
it's always a big tension between what we want as a culture and what we would consider like a balanced approach, a more harmonious approach, right? Like, and there are many ways it can go wrong, right? Like, you can be
Pagan
animistic.
culture is insane. The pagans with their nature, if it's you and nature, like you end up just sacrificing people a lot of the time. It's like you said, it's not idyllic. Yes, I get that. So
Mhm.
thank God we moved past that. Which is probably why we had to go so anti-nature, in retrospect. Like we were just, so in it that we probably had to ping pong out of it for a while. And now we get the luxury of, being able to I can go out into nature and not want to go fucking burn down the city.
It's always gonna be like a tension, right? Like we're always gonna have to be like mindful of how that balance works, and try to bring it back. But I think poetry is definitely like the most important link in art, to regain that deeper connection that makes it meaningful, not out of just like the mere practicality that where ecologists might fall on, right? Like, you have to protect nature because otherwise we're gonna die, or like very practical, kind of like still very rational approaches towards it, right? Like that do not take into account like the profound spiritual and transcendental role it plays in human lives.
Yeah, and I mean, and then the other thing, I mean, even just outside of that, you need most. If we're talking about poetry, most of the greatest poets had a lot of solitude. You look at Basho. I know you like the haiku guys. I mean, they just you need maybe it isn't the power of nature. It's just being alone. Just having that space to think and like not have interference is like that's really one of the more important things just for everybody, literature or poetry. And so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it's like nature is certainly like a piece of the puzzle, but if you're in a jail, you can still meditate and
Yeah.
get ahead. In terms of development, it's not necessarily just the path, right? But it's culturally, I think it's something that should be thought about in those terms, right? Like, and maybe to transition to another big theme of your work is like the myth of Orpheus, right? Like, in terms of your work, like a desert Orpheus seems to be like a sort of like a figure that encapsulates a lot of what your vision of poetry is. So how did it become relevant in your life, and how did it end up tied up to this sort of image of like desert Orpheus?
Yeah, that's a great question. People like ask me that all the time, and it just kind of happened, Benno. I have had a lot of grand plans with poetry that just haven't come to fruition, and this one just kind of came out of nowhere. Like this, I want like I have a big. I've always had an interest in Orpheus and Greek mythology, but then it just seemed like out of nowhere, like 4 years ago, I just kept getting this Orpheus was everywhere. Like it was just like synchronicity city. Like it just didn't stop. And I was like, what the fuck? And like there was albums and people and it'd be somewhere random. Oh, and they'd be mentioning Orpheus. And I was like, dude, what is happening? And I know he's like a big figure and like that just happens. But it's like suddenly like this big deal for me out of nowhere. And I was like, this is weird. Because I had this other plan and I still have all these poems. Like I have this 5 book series I want to write about the desert. That's almost like it's not like a memoir, but it's like more of like a narrative journey of like individuating through the desert and like anyway. So I have like that whole series and like that's what I was working on. I'm like this is gonna be huge. This is the grand plan, and suddenly this Orpheus thing came about and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. Then I like opened up a folder one day of like, of all these poems because for a while I was just writing poem after poem just for fun. And I was looking through this folder and I was like, dude, there's like 25 poems about Orpheus in here. It's like, what the hell? And I was like, what is this? And and they weren't even about Orpheus. Like, and a lot of the ones that you guys see now are like a bit more tailored, but I was like, dude, these are just random poems, but they're all about like this creative energy, about this like manifestation out of nowhere, like this creative ether. And I was like, Orpheus is the desert. Like, it's like out in the desert with the imagination, like I was saying, there is nothing out there. And so when you're out there, you project your mind, everything within you out on it. And your creativity. And it's like you have this almost palette, this artistic palette that you can push. And so then I started realizing, I was like, oh, wait, there is actually this, maybe this connection between the desert and like Greek mythology and my own schizo world. Um, and suddenly I just started exploring that. And then I really got interested in Rilke and sonnets to Orpheus. And I find that to be like one of the best pieces of poetry of like collections ever written. I was like, I want to translate this. And so I started translating it. I didn't even know there was going to be a Desert Orpheus collection yet. And then I was like, wait, I already have a book here. Like I'm basically like, halfway done with the book. And so, yeah, that's kind of been one of the main things I'm focusing on right now, just kind of out of nowhere. But yeah, anyway, Benno, that's the answer. I actually have like five other projects. Like it's gonna be weird. Like I have in my office right now, I have this like board where I'm like, this is how many poems I have for each collection. And it's like, damn, I should just make one collection. But I have like eight collections that are over halfway done. And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? But this is probably gonna be the first one out. But yeah, Desert Orpheus is probably gonna yeah, so that's where that's coming from. So yeah, I don't it's not as epic. It's not like I was like touched, it's just kind of happened. And I was like, okay, this seems cool.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Yeah, because like Orpheus is really interesting. Like on the one hand, yes, we have like the myth, but we also have like what we would consider still like a very like remnants of what it of like the poetical magical tradition. I'm not sure how much are you into like the Horphic hymns, but like there were like this collection of poems like addressed to the gods and goddesses that served as invocations, right? Like and it was the time where like in general, I probably like these are like probably specifically like magical, but like probably in their conception like something like the Odyssey and things like that wouldn't be too much far apart, maybe just in terms of like the muse you're addressing, or like the epics start basically almost like a magical spell to invoke the muse and get inspired to almost recite this. So is this like an aspect you think about or consider in your work?
Yeah, thank you for priming me, Benno. I'm always saying that writers need to be ready to talk about their work, and you just set it up a lot better for me. So yes, the Orphic cult, the Orphic energy, that whole idea, like you said, the Orphic invocations, like there's some great books out there. I've been thinking about including some of that stuff too and translating that or getting involved in that world or like doing like some nonfiction or even I have like a halfway fiction thing done. I might include too, like the story of Desert Orpheus, like but yeah, I mean, exactly. And that's like the muse. Like it's like, and that's why it's an interesting book to start with, is like it's the Kickstarter, it's the wands, it's the fire. Like it is like that energy. Because if you look at the energy of Orpheus, and if you look at how influential Greek mythology has been on everything, like everything, it Orpheus is the guy. He is the poet. He is the musician. He is one of the main figures of creativity and that creative spark. And like um, I mean, like I said, we go even like occultists and the Hermetic traditions, like they're all super into him. And so like it's that energy. And so, and it's interesting that like yeah, I mean, it's just really cool to like dive back to that, like the OG axiomatic energy. And like, I really feel like it's giving praise to him and giving praise to that because we wouldn't be here without that. Like, as poets, like, it's like that energy carried forth for such a long time. Because what's the Christian equivalent? Like, I'm trying to think, like, who's been carrying the creative torch as kind of the figure for a long time. And it's still him at some level.
Yeah, like definitely Christianity has like a strange relationship to artists, right? Like we do have like certain very important figures like Saint John of the Cross, who I think like in Spanish poetry, like I think is really amazing and very and was very influential. And you know like but we got very few saints, I would say, that makes that bridge between artists and like religious people. We of course have a lot of religious like artists, like Michelangelo and a lot of the other Renaissance painters, you know, and we could like cite a lot. But yeah, it's
They lived. Those were living, and so like St. John's awesome. Like obviously Christianity's got the greatest artists of all time, man. Like obviously. But then it's like, when something's not real, or maybe he was real, but when you have a myth, like it has that energy to it. Like it can carry forth, because there's a million. Here's just another interpretation of Desert Orpheus. Like
mhm.
St. John of the Cross existed. We know his work, we know his biography, and so it's kind of set in stone. And you and I could sit and reinterpret him. But the Orphic myth is basically it's a forever renewal. And that's what's interesting about the Iliad, the Odyssey. It's like everything. When you're the first, everyone has to keep copying you. You're like the simulacra, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and you know, like at least I think a really essential aspect of like Greek culture was that it was mostly artistically driven, which that's what I think made it special among other cultures. Where, and we could say Christianity, where like the development of like the religion is not based in aesthetic means. Like if I write like a better Bible, you know, like they're not that's not gonna make anybody, you know, change nothing. But if you were like Sophocles and you wrote like a beautiful tragedy which represented in a more powerful way certain myth, that would become canon. And I think that's what made it like a very fecund and very vital in terms of how it can be incorporated into or you know like art, and why it became so relevant as a tradition, you know, in contrast to other like um cultural roots, I guess, in Western society.
Yeah, and speaking of the Renaissance, literary Renaissance, you just mentioned a bunch of Renaissancean poets or guys who are artists or people who were near there. The Renaissance only happened because and same the Renaissance in Christianity, Aquinas only, remade Christianity because of the Greeks. The Renaissance happened because they looked back to the Greeks. America happened because if you look at the architecture of America, well, it's not the Greeks, but it's Roman, which is still Greek. There's actually something crazy I learned that like Benjamin Franklin and many of those guys at the conception of America they were Freemasons, occultists, astrologers, and that they actually waited to sign the Declaration of Independence. They had it ready at like 5 p.m. But then Benjamin Franklin, who was an astrologer, said, "Hey, we need to wait 9 hours because there's a certain transit." And so they waited. And one of the reasons they wanted to do that is because they felt like they were creating the new Rome. And then look at the new Renaissance. It's very interesting. And I don't know when that cycle ends. I don't know when we like don't have to keep going back to the Greeks to like create a new Renaissance. Yeah, anyway, so
Yeah, it's hard to tell, you know, like I think it's interesting to think about cycles, you know, and but also, you know, like how like maybe, you know, like we can start like doing that, but like with Christianity, you know, like you know, like giving that vital power to those stories, you know, or whatever it is, like you know, a lot of people I think that's like a very important aspect that, you know, has also been kind of forgotten, like the myth aspect that is carried by the poet, like in making it vital again, right? Like in giving these stories like in life and meaningfulness. And so yeah, I think that that could tie to, I think, like another important aspect that I think is very influential for you, which is like Robert Bly, which I think along Rilke, it seems to be like the two poets that mostly influence you.
yeah, yeah, Robert Bly for sure. And what makes Robert Bly great is that he just can introduce you if you go through his work to a ton of other people. Like that's his biggest impact. Even though I'm a huge fan of his poetry, his first three poetry books, "Silence in the Snowy Fields," "The Sleepers Joining Hands," and "The Light Around the Body" are epic. I mean, one won the National Book Award. Like they have the best so in "Silence in the Snowy Fields," he brought probably for the first time, like he took Chinese poetry to the next level. He said, I'm going to do radical plainness. I'm going to write poetry that's radical, but that's also super plain. And he accomplished it. And then the Vietnam War was happening, and he said, you know what, I'm going to write war poems. And he still has the best anti-war poems I've ever read. And then he said, hey, I'm really into Carl Jung. I'm going to write a Jungian poem. And God, that sounds like a disaster. But it's really good. And so, yeah, anyway, so like he was super great poet, but then also like he is so influential for me because like for multiple reasons. One, because he just can introduce you to a million different people, which is awesome. And speaking of collaboration, he collaborated with people and brought people to the light. The only reason you and I know about Pablo Neruda is because of him, like, which is crazy. Do you know about that story?
Was it the one where he went to Norway and
Yeah.
just found it? Yeah.
He got translated into Norwegian, then he translated him out of Norwegian. It's like, who the fuck is this guy? And so it's just like, wow, like that's what you can do when you go out and you're trying to help and do things. And whoever that Norwegian dude that translated Naruto originally, it's like, wow, these chains are crazy. And so yeah, so that's one aspect, but then also Bly like was a champion for like keeping standards in poetry. Like, we read Iron John and stuff. And that's not necessarily related to poetry, but keeping like traditions alive and like respecting the movement and like not getting lost in like what we're lost in now. And so like just it's a nice trifold thing of like he was a big advocate for like movements and in-person events and like getting us going in that way. He also like helped others and like for years, created careers for so many people. Then he was a legit poet of his own. And so like when I look at myself, I'm like, wow, that's like the model that I want to follow. Like I want to be legit. I want people to read me and be like, that's fire. I want to help others. And then I want to like, be like kickstarting a movement. So yeah, like very inspirational for me in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, like Robert Bly, I think is definitely inspirational and carried a lot of um, virtues that I think are really hard to find, even looking like hundreds of years past, right? And maybe that's also kind of like the reason that maybe he didn't have also like the impact that he should have because in those terms he was so directly opposed to all the literary establishments and directions that he really seems like an island in terms of like his place in like history and but it's hopefully the place from where we can like you know also start again, like I wouldn't want to follow in the tradition of like John Berryman, Sylvia Plath.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. He was the first person that pointed out that all those people killed themselves. And I was like, oh shit. Like he's right. Like, wow. Like this is a terrible group. This is a high risk group. Like, this is like that's for it's the extreme sports of poetry, man. You're gonna end up dead.
Yeah, and like it's certainly something that that it's been going already for too long, like from and not necessarily to disparage it completely, but just like the tradition like of like the of from Baudelaire on, and Rimbaud and all these uh people, like I think it's become just unsustainable, right? Like and not even fertile anymore, like it's already
Yeah.
like like there's only so much your liver will handle before like
Yeah. Well, and it's been done. I mean, and that's one of the problems with the internet. I mean, it's nice because like I've been inundated with so much confessional, internal, navel-gazing poetry. I have enough for a lifetime. I don't care. And there could be a guy or gal that is like groundbreaking, and I would understand it, but but I don't like for some reason I've been trained even before I knew about John Berryman, that this like isn't necessarily like as artsy or as revolutionary or as connected to something as I want it to be. Because like I said, I read your stuff and other people's. Like I said, I read that Powerline poem, and then the one I forget the name. I read it this morning, the one with the branches. Um, what was that one called, Benno? You just released it.
A City's a Promise.
Yeah, that was
Mm,
great. And I read that and I'm like, this isn't some you're not worshiping nature, you're not doing what I'm doing. But I'm like, this is art. You know what I mean? Like this is like connected to something. Like this is actually art. And like yeah, I mean, and that's just I feel like the base standard. And so anyway, yeah. I feel like
yeah.
yeah, I feel like we've totally got moved astray with that whole lineage because you can the internal world, that superficial world, that base level world can only go so far.
Mm.
But like with art and interpreting like the many facets of life that are endless, it never ends actually.
Yeah, and it's just like part of what it's interesting also about like in literature specifically is how much we tend to mythologize certain figures, right? Like we had like certain because we have like certain notions of what the life of a writer will be and have like these romantic ideals and kind of similar to what happens now with like well, or it's gonna die out, but what happened to with rock stars and like rappers. You
Yeah.
start like boxing the work inside of a stereotype, and that's what's actually harmful, like I don't care necessarily if you're like a junkie for other reasons, but when you're doing it because it's what your idea of what a writer should be, and that is cool somehow, right? Like and that it's like a cool form of living. It is not, like it's not about judging, like whatever, we all have our whatever defects, but don't do them out of like this out of LARPing, and thinking that that will get you somewhere.
Yeah, and that's what's really cool about the community. And actually everyone you've interviewed, like you interviewed Will Price, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like Will Price, like he's a teacher, like he's just a chill dude, like doing his own thing, writes good poetry, like he's not living, even me, like I'm not living some, maybe people think I am. I'm not living an extravagant lifestyle. Like most days I go to my job, talk to a bunch of 17-year-olds, take a walk at the park, write a little bit, read a little bit, make a video, and that's it. That's literally what I do almost every day of the year.
Mm.
And that's and like you know what I mean? And I'm like, wait, and like that Bodie, you talked to Bodie, like that it's not like yeah, anyway. And so like it's I think that's really healthy. I think it's like a really healthy thing that like that we can do this and like and that's what's nice about self-publishing and all of this like we don't have to necessarily do that. You don't have to be crazy. Like I haven't made like I don't know if I've maybe made 5 videos that aren't just me being a talking head. They're like me outside. Like I could just sit here and talk and I could act crazy and get all amped up and say some crazy shit. But in general, like we don't need to be to promote our work, we don't need to be like Jake Paul or like, be an actual character.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's part of the reasons I want to make like these interviews and just show like different like kinds of people that can really care deeply about poetry and like make meaningful work without necessarily falling into like neatly defined boxes for merchandise, right? Like and that are easily marketable, and that you can still like have like a different backgrounds, religions, and like approaches to poetry, and still find that rewarding, as work, and produce like things that are meaningful for others.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what really blew my mind. Like I talked to 120 writers for 20 minutes back in October, and I was like, I was kind of that's what was shocking. I was like, wow, there's like I mean, it, but like, I was talking to some random kid who's in college in Indonesia, and he's like, this is what I'm doing. And he's writing poems about this. And then, do you know, like, what's his name? I don't want to get his name wrong. Um, anyway, but we know many similar people, and it's like, wow, this is awesome. Like, this is, and even you, Benno, like down there in Mexico City, man, holding it down, man. It's awesome, man. So yeah, man. So thank you for doing all this, man. Like it's super legit, man. These are some of my favorite interviews on Substack. I've listened to them all, man. Like, um, Yeah. So thank you for adding me to the group, you know. That's I don't know. Yeah, anyway, like I said, I actually really like everyone you've interviewed so far. So I'm even though I have a lot of subscribers, I hope my poetry can also stand with theirs because they have some really awesome stuff, man. I hope Bodie, if you're listening to this, Bodie, keep posting. Where the hell are you at, man? I love those cloud poems, you know, picture of the clouds and the poetry, man. Like get back in it, man.
Yeah, I'll tell Bodhi. I'll send it like specifically. I'll tag him. But yeah, thanks a lot for coming on. I think a lot of people will be really pleased to hear about your perspective as a poet, right? Because like I think you've mentioned it that you like at the beginning you tried to like do more poetry videos and saw that nobody was kind of like watching and had to kind of like switch into doing like more standard videos about novels and things like that, right? So I think a lot of people will really enjoy to hearing about this other avenue of your work, right? That sometimes yeah, like people don't really know what poets are doing that, you know,
Yeah.
they just figure it's just like writing in a corner and like drinking like booze and and it's way more complex and way more ritual. Every what I like is that like everybody that I've interviewed almost is like a deeply tied to their spirituality, right? So yeah, it's to regain that notion that poetry can be a vessel towards the transcendental, right? Like that it's deep, it can be deeply meaningful in that way. So I don't know. Do you have anything else you want to mention? Before we close.
Well, Benno, let's give some shout outs, man. This is 2005 radio, man. This is one of my favorite things to do. Let's shout out to Benno, shout out to Will Price, shout out to Keith Hill in the woods, wherever the hell he's at. Shout out to Bodie, shout out to Josh. Who else you want to shout out, Benno? You got anybody else?
Well, recently I had like an interview with Ben Sadok, man.
Yeah, love Ben's. That's yep,
Yeah,
Ben's his dick. Shout out Ben's.
yeah, and yeah. Hopefully, like if Keith is like listening, man. We miss you, man. Like, hope you're doing okay.
Yeah, man. Come back. Dude, Keith is so fire. Just to close, so funny. Like I remember showing my kids one of his poems. They're like, "Who the fuck is this guy?" I don't know.
Yeah, I know, man. I chatted a lot with him. It was always wild, man. Like every one of our collaborations, I didn't know what was happening half of the time. He would just like send me like random email saying like, hey, you son of a bitch, hashtag, and then just like whoopity doop doop. It's just
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
it.
yeah. Well,
That.
I'm sad because he never released his novel. He sent me his novel and I read it a couple times actually. Um, it was the most wild thing I've ever read.
Mhm.
I was like, oh my God, what the hell is this? And so anyway, we'll coax him back in eventually. I understand, man. Like I've quit social media like at least 20 times in my life.
Mhm.
Um, like my YouTube channel took forever to get off because I'm done. 6 months later, okay, I'm back in. Like, so anyway, so shout outs to all of them. Shout out to my wife, shout out to Misty Violet, shout out Robert Bly. Shout out, we're gonna do Raise the Dead, Cormac McCarthy, God Dead author, Benno, to close the show. Who do you want to shout out?
Oh man, I
The
don't
grave.
know. Well, yeah. I don't know if I'm reading right now Franz Kafka, so
Okay.
shouts out to him. He didn't have an easy time. I think he would have despised social media. I think he would have had like a really hard time. Uh, and um, and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. There you go. Shout out to him. You know who swam a mile in a river every day in the summer?
um, yeah,
Pretty
like
cool. Like people like I always thought of him as like just as this like little sad boy that was weak, but he was swimming in a river in Austria, wherever he was from. So
yeah, he had like different episodes in his life, and yeah, I think he gets boxed into like a very uh caricaturesque version of himself, but yeah, he did have like an episode of his life where he was really ill, but he also had like episodes where he was just like a very healthy individual, working, swimming,
yeah. Shout out to
doing
him.
his thing.
My favorite comment, Benno, to close the show is when people are like, Franz Kafka would fucking hate you. Cormac McCarthy would hate you. I'm like, I'm sure he would, man. Like, I
Yeah,
don't
that
care.
honestly, that's great, man. You know, like when I've gotten a few like hate comments on my on like my poetry, I get glad it like I take it as a sign of like success, you know. Like when you actually start getting haters, man, like haters will go through your work like very few of your fans will,
Yeah,
you know,
well,
like
that's so funny you mentioned that. It was so funny I'm talking about my poetry today because yesterday I got like a four, it was like Benno, it was 40 paragraphs. It hit the max limit on Gmail of a guy just breaking down my poetry. He was like, the poem isn't poeming. And then he was like telling me, he's like, you write like a first grader. I was like, damn, he's mad. And I looked at it, I was like, and I checked it for AI, and I was like, this guy had to have spent 5 or 6 hours writing this. I feel so bad. Like, Jesus, this guy spent his afternoon just shitting on me. I'm like, wow, thank you. And I
yeah,
was like,
yeah.
wow, I'm creating reactions. That's good.
Yeah. If you're not getting hate comments, you're doing something wrong. That's you know
What
that's
you need to do with your hate comments, though, that guy should, if that guy turned that into a Substack post, I'm sure it would get a lot of love.
mhm. Yeah,
Don't
yeah.
don't write an email, post on Substack where the literary renaissance is happening.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So, Ian, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm really glad to have you on, and yeah, like best to you and your endeavors. We'll be waiting for like Desert Orpheus to hit. Maybe we'll have some invocations. You know, like I don't
Yeah.
know.
Oh, there will be. There will be.
We'll see. We'll get all the witch e-girl TikTokers on. I think that might be like your best chance at getting your e-girl school for like writing.
That's not the worst idea. They love TikTok has like a huge mythology section. Like I actually get people, they actually have come to my Substack before and they're like, "Oh my gosh." And then I go to their profiles and it's like all like they're like e-girls and they're like it's all like mythology. All they care about is mythology. So like I didn't realize that. I was like, "Oh shit." So, yeah. Just wait you guys. I'm going to be huge. I'm going to be the next TikTok author. Barnes and Noble, Desert Orpheus.
Yeah, you need to tap into like the witch TikTok, man. That's
Yeah.
that's that's where it's at.
Yeah, don't worry. There's gonna be a new set, Dark Academia. I'm gonna be like get some tattoos, like ah, just talk like that. Just be a fucking idiot. Yeah, I could do that.
Well, we are here for it. We are here
Thank
for
you.
it, man.
All
Anyways,
right, thank you, Benno. Thank you, everybody. Shout out to you guys.
all right. Goodbye.